By the time the C-17 wheels kissed home and the rotors wound down in my head, the first thing I saw at the end of my gravel lane wasn't my porch or my cottonwoods or even the old windmill that complains in a voice like my grandfather's cough. It was a pair of orange survey flags trembling like tiny flames and a leaning real estate sign that read Pendangesoldi, zip-tied to my fence like a ransom note. There were bulldozer treads tattooed across the ditch I dug with my father when I was 17, and a slab of new concrete poured half on my side of the boundary like a boot heel on a throat. Standing in front of the sign, arms crossed in the all-too-familiar X of suburban sovereignty, was the HOA president, the heavy-set woman everyone called Karen to her face because she wanted you to, because she wore the name like a badge that could stop traffic. She smiled the kind of smile that tells you she's rehearsed it in a mirror. "Welcome back, soldier," she said, pushing air through her teeth like a hiss dressed as hospitality. We processed the parcel as abandoned under community code, assessed unpaid dues, and sold it to recover our costs. She gestured at my pasture as if a magician had just produced a rabbit from it. "You'll need to remove your personal items by Friday." I stepped closer until I could read the ink bleed around the word sold, until I could smell the concrete dust of a walkway I didn't pour and a future I didn't choose. "Abandoned," I repeated, because sometimes saying a lie out loud makes it wobble. I left for deployment with a recorded notice on file, a neighbor with a key, property taxes on autopay, and a signed affidavit from the county clerk stating this parcel is outside your HOA. She tilted her chin like a bulldozer blade catching sunlight. "You went silent," she said. "We acted. Community standards must be upheld." My hands wanted fists. My training gave me pockets. I slid them there, breathed out slow enough to cool a skillet, and said, "You trespassed. You recorded a fraudulent lien. You sold something you don't own." She smiled harder, like a door locking. "Our council approved," she said. "You can take it up with him." Behind her, two 20-somethings in matching polo shirts and nervous smiles held clipboards and phones at the ready, filming me like a trophy they'd hang on a clubhouse wall. The counterpunch didn't come from my mouth. Came from paper. I went straight to the county recorder's office with dust in my boots and deployment grit still rimmed on my eyes, where Ms. Laird, a woman whose bun and bifocals hid a mind that could outpace any lawyer I'd ever met, slid a stack of files across the counter like a deck she'd been waiting to deal. The HOA's lien was there, stamped 3 days after I flew out, citing unpaid dues for improvements I never used to, a pool I never swam in, behind a fence I never voted for. Attached was a public nuisance finding signed by a committee that included 3 neighbors I'd once helped dig out after a storm, claiming my pasture was a fire hazard despite the irrigated alfalfa glowing green as a promise. There was a quiet title action filed in small claims as if land was a TV you could roll away. But beneath those papers, under the ink and audacity, were older documents with thicker edges. My grandfather's 1974 deed with a clean chain of title, a recorded declaration from 1991 where the original developer had explicitly excluded our tract from the HOA because an old mill wellhead and a World War II-era equipment yard straddled the back corner, and, sitting like a steel beam no one noticed because time had painted it barn red, a 1952 easement in favor of the Department of Defense and the Army Corps of Engineers for emergency staging, ingress and egress across our private road. Renewed in 2002 at my father's kitchen table with a handshake and a signature from a colonel whose photo hangs in the firehouse. Ms. Laird tapped the easement with a fingernail. "They never look for these," she said, not unkindly. "People playing Empire forget the country already wrote itself into the land." I called base legal from the parking lot. Jag answered on the second ring. The captain listened like a person takes a pulse. He didn't promise cavalry. He promised process. "Email me scans. Tell me what the HOA recorded. Tell me when the sale closes. Tell me who drove a dozer over your ditch." I did. He called the state attorney general's property fraud unit. They looped in the county prosecutor. The Army Corps liaison called me back before I reached my gate. "Sergeant, we don't wade into neighbor spats," the liaison said, voice all gravel and caution. "But if an easement is threatened and access is obstructed, we will enforce. Keep notes. Film everything. Don't escalate." When I stepped out of my truck at my own fence, Karen was waiting with a laminated packet and a smile rabbits must fear. "We'll be putting up a gate tomorrow," she announced. "HOA security access only." She made security sound like salvation. You do that, I said, and you lock a federal easement. She scoffed like I'd told a ghost story. There is no federal here, she said. There is community. She waved toward the subdivision where vinyl fences ran like bleached bones and identical porch swings creaked in the same wind. I looked past her at the wooden sign I'd hung on the fence post before I left. Veteran Land Federal Easement. Permanent marker letters burned in by the sun. A little crooked where my son had insisted on helping. She saw it but chose the mirror where her power looked bigger than ink. The next morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to jumpstart a tractor and stood in my ditch with a tape measure and the kind of patience soldiers lend to fence posts. 2 men showed up in matching HOA hats with a new steel gate welded on a trailer, and behind them came a woman in heels unsuited to gravel who introduced herself as counsel like the title was armor. We have authority, she said. We will protect the neighborhood from liabilities. The men unloaded the gate and started measuring the posts I owned, whistling like it made trespass polite. That's when a white pickup with the county seal rolled in behind them and parked sideways across the lane as if to make a point about lines. Out stepped Deputy Rosa Delgadillo, relation to the deputy from the campfire story you might have heard, but cut from the same cloth where fairness isn't decoration. Morning, she said. We received a call about a disturbance. Karen materialized as if woven from HOA bylaws and will. Officer. We're installing a security gate authorized by the board for the safety of our children. She pointed at me like a weather vane spinning in a squall. He's refusing to comply. Delgado chewed a peppermint and looked at the easement sign. The gate on the trailer, the council's heels, the line painted by the surveyor who'd come at dawn on his own time to snap chalk over the truth. I'm not here to referee a civil matter, she said, but nobody's installing anything today on property that isn't theirs. Karen's smile pulled tight enough to sing. It is ours by vote, she said, holding up a sheaf of papers shaking with the weight of her certainty. Delgado nodded at my phone. Film, she said softly. You'll need it. Then to the men with the gate. Load it back up. They hesitated. Counsel cleared her throat to summon more law from thin air. The men looked at her shoes and at me and at the deputy who could haul them in for criminal mischief and decided steel was heavy enough to merit caution. They left. Karen didn't. Here's where the twist arrived, not because we planned it for drama, but because my grandfather planned for storms. The surveyor, Mr. Thorne, a quiet man with sun cracks at his eyes, had poked around the back corner near the cottonwoods where the subdivision's decorative pond pinched the old mill yard. And what he found under a cedar plank that looked like nothing was a capped pipe and a stamped plate from the Army Corps with a serial number that matched the 1952 easement documents. Beneath the pond's pretty mirror, beneath the HOA's Instagram sunsets, ran the subdivision's main water line laid in the 90s and slopped right over my land by a contractor who either misread the plat or winked at it. Mr. Thorne stood at my truck bed and drew the line on dust with his finger. If the HOA wanted to pretend I belonged to them, they'd have to admit their pipe belonged to me. And the reversionary clause my grandfather tucked into the 1974 deed, the clause no one reads because they think old men are sentimental, not surgical, said any entity that encroached would trigger a right to seek injunctive relief and damages, including control of access points necessary to secure the property's use and safety. They'd taken a bite. The law let me set my teeth. 2 days later, a convoy showed up. Not a movie convoy with tanks and flags and music you can feel in your bones. A practical one, the kind soldiers build out of necessity and logistics and checklists. 1 Army Corps truck with a right-of-way inspector and a very calm lawyer in a blue windbreaker. 1 National Guard engineering unit on orders for a weekend training exercise that JAG called disaster readiness staging, and which, thanks to the easement, included my lane. 2 base MPs to keep the peace. A county deputy and a state AG investigator with a folder labeled fraud in handwriting big enough to qualify as optimism. And because the law values sunlight as much as it hates surprises, the convoy rolled in at noon with beacons rotating and papers served at the gate as cleanly as a surgeon drapes a field. I didn't wave a saber. I offered coffee from a steel thermos and watched a machine I used to belong to do the one thing it's best at when it is at its best. Support the rule of law with quiet muscle. Karen met them at the subdivision entrance with a megaphone and a film crew of neighbors whose folding chairs scratched the pavement like crickets. You cannot bring military equipment into our neighborhood. She shouted, words bouncing off vinyl siding and fear. This is a peaceful community. The core lawyer didn't argue through plastic. He spoke into paper. We are here to inspect and secure a federal easement, he said. Your board has obstructed it. Please step aside. Karen stepped in front of the lead truck like a one-woman tide. Children are present, she cried. You will traumatize them. Behind her, 2 teenagers rolled their eyes toward heaven. The AG investigator, a woman named Cho with a voice like clean glass, handed Karen a notice freezing the HOA's accounts and a subpoena for all communications related to my parcel's abandonment. The quitclaim deed they filed to themselves like passing a hot potato into their own hands, and the sale contract signed with the developer who had already poured a sidewalk on land he didn't own. Karen tried to refuse the papers. The deputy placed them gently on the folding table with the lemonade. The cameras caught everything because truth likes to be noticed when it finally shows up dressed for court. I wish I could tell you she recognized the line she'd crossed and stepped back with dignity. Instead, she climbed onto a plastic chair and declared the core a trespasser, the state a bully, and me a thief, as if going to war on behalf of a country disqualified me from living in it. Then she tried to loop a chain through my gatepost and lock it as if metal could trump a federal stamp. The MPs did what MPs do when someone clips at the edges of safety. They held out their hands, palms open, and said, "Ma'am, don't." She did. The chain bit her palm. The lock snapped. The camera phones leaned in. When Deputy Delgado told her to step aside, Karen refused. When AG Cho explained interfering with an easement enforcement could add a count none of us wanted to say out loud, Karen smirked like the word count meant YouTube views. When the core inspector asked to see the HOA's plat and pipe permits, Karen said we don't show internal documents to outsiders, and then remembered she had signed a public utility agreement 10 years ago that made those documents as public as sunlight. That's when the treasurer, man named Rudy with the look of someone whose conscience had been nagging him nightly, stepped forward with a thumb drive and a simple sentence that changed the weight of the afternoon. I can't carry this anymore, he said. He handed the drive to AG Cho. I backed up the board emails. I backed up the vote tallies the president told me to change. I backed up the council's drafts. I backed up the deed conversations with the developer. He swallowed hard as if guilt had edges. I kept it in a safe deposit box in case I got scared. I'm scared. But I'm more tired. They set up a folding table at my fence and turned my ditch into a courtroom without the marble. A generator humming, a laptop warming, a printer offering each document like a confession. The thumb drive coughed up emails with subject lines like expedite lien and quiet title before soldier returns. And, worst of all, a thread in which Karen instructed counsel to lean on the county clerk to hurry a filing because optics are on our side while he's still out of state. There were chat logs where the developer joked about pouring first, asking permission later, and a draft speech for the HOA meeting bragging about bringing order to adjacent parcels like Empire in miniature. There was even a doctored map with my boundaries shaded into their pink, someone's sloppy cursor work visible, as if the land would blush and agree. Standing there, watching my life get printed in toner and gotchas, I felt anger rise like a tide trying to swallow reason, and then I felt something calmer step over it. The realization that the only thing stronger than rage is a record. You can't argue with ink when it's honest. The Corps exercised the easement. The guard engineers staged vehicles and a water buffalo in my pasture, set up a sandbag lane and a triage tent because somewhere a river would flood this year and somewhere people would need saving, and training matters more than optics if you actually care about the people behind the optics. The MPs positioned themselves at the easement entrance with the deputy, not to menacingly militarize a cul-de-sac, but to stop anyone from doing anything stupid near a federally protected right-of-way. AG Cho served a notice of civil action and a motion for immediate injunctive relief to stop all HOA work touching my property. And the state judge, God bless a court clerk who moves paper like air, granted it before the lemonade warmed. By dusk, the developer's crew had jackhammered out the slab they'd poured across my line like an apology written in dust. By moonrise, a temporary fence marked the edge with survey flags blinking like tiny, tired lighthouses. Karen watched it all from her folding chair throne, arms crossed, lips white at the edges where defiance gnaws on fear. When the deputy finally asked her to leave the easement entrance so trucks could move, she refused. When he told her refusal meant arrest, She laughed until the laugh remembered handcuffs are real. He read the trespass statute the way a teacher reads a bedtime story no one wants. She stood, shook the chair, and called the neighbors to witness tyranny. The cameras caught it. The pinch of her mouth when the cuffs clicked, the way her shoulders suddenly looked small once certainty had to ride in the back seat. It didn't end with a gate and a pair of cuffs. It never does when paper is heavy. The AG filed a civil fraud suit naming the HOA Corporation, the board, the council, and the developer. The county prosecutor added criminal counts for recording a false instrument. The state water board opened an inquiry into the HOA's encroaching line, and a judge appointed a receiver to manage the HOA while the smoke cleared. Receivers are accountants with scalpel hands. They found the HOA had been bleeding money into security improvements and legal contingencies. Both synonyms for control, both pipelines to nowhere. With finances frozen and penalties looming, the HOA did what corporations do when the tide goes out. They sold what they could to pay what they must. The common areas, the pool, the clubhouse, the pretty pond with a pipe running like a secret under a twent to auction. No one wanted the liability. Everyone wanted to be seen wanting community. The developer sniffed but backed away when AG Cho raised an eyebrow. My wife, Maya, squeezed my hand until it hurt, and my nonprofit, the one my grandfather dreamed aloud and I built on my days off. The one that runs wilderness therapy weekends for vets and disaster readiness training for locals, bid $1 with a promise attached. We would keep the amenities open under a community land trust, charge fair dues only to those who wanted in, dissolve the coercive HOA and replace it with voluntary stewardship. The judge smiled like a person who had seen enough brawls to appreciate a truce. Sold, he said, the word landing soft where the sign once screamed it. We didn't take the subdivision with soldiers. We took responsibility with signatures. Karen's ending wasn't a scream. It was paperwork. She pled no contest to recording a false lien and to interfering with the easement enforcement. The bar looked at counsel and saw ethics bent into pretzels. Suspension followed. The developer paid a fine that felt like a slap to him and like a small victory to those of us who've been slapped before. The board members who followed orders quietly resigned and fixed their fences and brought pies and apologized in ways it takes time to trust, but I am trying. Because living next to people means accepting apologies as down payments, not deeds. Karen had to do community service, and the judge who had a memory like the county map assigned it at our nonprofit under a condition that felt cruel until it felt right. She would check emergency kits with our students, inventory radios, and carry sandbags at drills. The first Saturday she showed. She wore sunglasses big enough to hide in and a mouth as still as a lake above a storm. I didn't gloat. I handed her a list and a Sharpie that bled a little and a plastic bin labeled first aid. She worked. She said nothing. She did not look at me. A teenager asked her if she'd always hated soldiers. She flinched. I told the kid not to weaponize questions, and he nodded like a kid who understood weapons better than he should. At lunch, she stood alone at the shade fly until Maya, who has patched up men on the worst days of their lives and still believes in better ones, walked over with a sandwich and a bottle of water and the kind of small grace that builds a country more than any convoy ever will. Karen took both and said thank you so quietly the word sounded like it had never been used before. I won't pretend we turned a dictatorship into a commune by magic. We wrote bylaws for the land trust that read like a promise instead of a threat, and we made every vote require supermajority and every fee transparent and every enforcement mechanism subject to a cooling-off period and a neighbor mediation first. We posted a big board on the clubhouse wall where rules used to glare, and it listed classes instead. Chainsaw safety, stop the bleed, how to read a plat map, know your rights and your responsibilities. The pool opened on weekends to anyone who signed a waiver and brought 2 canned goods for the food bank. The pond got a native plant buffer and a sign that explained what a riparian zone is without talking down to anyone. The fence lines got rerun to the inch, and the survey flags came down. And one afternoon I watched 3 kids race leaf boats down my ditch with the kind of laughter that forgives adults slowly but surely. At the entrance where the HOA once planned a gate, we hung a wooden board with hand-painted letters as crooked as hope. Respect property. Respect people. Ask first. Help often. The sign swings in the wind. It squeaks. It's not a law. It's better. On the night the receiver filed the last report, and the judge dissolved the HOA Corporation like a storm that had finally rained itself out, I walked the boundary with my son and daughter and a flashlight that made the cat's eyes glow. We found the old core plate again, brushed dirt off it with our sleeves, and I told them how their great-grandfather signed that easement because he believed in something bigger than himself and how believing bigger doesn't mean letting someone smaller trample you. My daughter asked if we took the subdivision. I told her we took responsibility. My son asked if the soldiers scared anyone. I told him uniforms scare some people because they've only seen them on TV, not standing at a fence post explaining an easement with patience. They both asked if Karen was gone. I told them she lives 3 streets over and is learning the shape of the word neighbor the same way the rest of us are. Letter by letter, rule by rule, grace by grace. That's the story. An HOA sold my land while I was deployed, sure of itself enough to pour concrete on a lie. I came back with the military, not as a weapon but as a witness, and with the law, not as a cudgel but as a compass. We pried truth out from under paper and put it back where it belongs on the ground in the light shared. The ending wasn't fireworks. It was a chain unhooked, an auction gavel that sounded like mercy. A Saturday spent counting tourniquets with someone who once tried to chain my gate. Maybe you think I went too far bringing soldiers into a subdivision, even if the easement made it lawful. Maybe you think I didn't go far enough and should have sued until the vinyl fences bent. Maybe you just think we got lucky. I think we did the thing we ask of each other in a country held together by lines and promises. We held the line without breaking the promise. Would you have handled it differently? Was I right or wrong to fight back this way? What do you think?